Good afternoon. This is David with the Spokane Woodcraft store. This afternoon we're going to do a quick demonstration on tuning up hand planes. Hand planes are something that have been around for forever. They're an incredibly handy tool in any woodworker's shop, but they do require some maintenance, and depending on where you get yours, they may require a little bit of tune-up before they're really useful. Hand planes have a number of components that are very similar no matter what size unit you're looking at. The front and rear totes are your handles so that you'd be holding onto it this direction. You have the sole of the hand plane here, and this section where the blade comes through is the mouth. Now, hand planes come apart into a number of pieces. First piece is the cap iron. This is what actually locks everything down, holds everything in place. You can take the blade out here, and you have the blade and you have the chip breaker. The blade and chip breaker function together, and as you can see are actually attached to one another. And then the last piece here is your frog. Don't ask me who came up with the name. The frog is used to adjust where in the mouth the blade is actually going to protrude. The lateral adjustment here is used to make sure that the blade is sitting square, or depending on how you grind the blade, you may force it to sit at an angle, allowing you to take a little bit different cut. This screw here is what the cap iron works against to actually lock everything down. And then there is an adjustment knob here, and this adjustment knob actually controls how far forward the blade sits. So it controls how much of the blade is actually protruding out of the mouth. Now, there are a lot of hand plane manufacturers out there. This one I picked up at a thrift store. Apparently was originally made by Handyman. Never heard of them. But there are a lot of hand plane manufacturers out there. Stanley is one of the most recognized brands out there. Lee Nielsen, Bridgeport Planes, Woodcraft, we have our own line of hand planes, the Wood River V3s. You can find them anywhere. You can find hand planes from under $100 to several $100. It just all depends on what your own budget is. As I said, in this one's case, I found this one at a thrift store. And it's important to point out that the biggest difference between a $40 hand plane and a $400 hand plane, one obviously is going to be the materials. This one is a nice cast iron little body, and the high-end planes are going to be brass and bronze and things like that. But those don't affect its function. They have functionally the same parts and they do the same job. So if you find one that's in reasonably good shape at a thrift store, you may just need to go through and do a tune-up job on it to get it right back to working order. And that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to show you how to take a plane that's maybe seen a little wear and tear and bring it back to a functional unit. If you go onto YouTube or somebody like that, you can find a lot of videos that talk about doing full restorations on hand planes. What they're talking about is actually pulling every piece of this thing apart, removing all of the old paint, taking this whole thing down to bare metal. That's great if you're trying to recreate a showpiece. I'm not really trying to recreate a showpiece. I just want this thing to work the way it's supposed to. So the first thing that I want to make sure of is this sole here flat? Now, if it's a little bit shallow in here, that's not going to affect its function. If it's a little bit shallow right in here, that's not really going to affect its function. All across the edges, I want that flat, and I want it to be the same level right here around the mouth. So those are my critical areas, right around the mouth and all around the edges. As long as those are all at the same plane, then we will be just fine. So in order to make sure that it's nice and flat, one thing you need is a nice flat surface. Now, in this case, I have a large block that is machined flat of granite. I have used this block for dressing up a number of different planes. If I was flattening off a larger, like a number 6 or a number 7 hand plane, I would look for a different surface. The hand plane is going to be longer than this block is, and that could lead me to rocking back or forth on the front or rear edge. For a number 3, 4, 5, this size block works great. And as far as my flattening abrasive, what I've got here is a sheet of 320 grit wet dry sandpaper. 220 grit is going to help it go a little faster. This one I think is in pretty decent shape to begin with, so I'm not worried about using the 320. A little bit of water on there, and the water actually keeps the sandpaper pretty much in place. So to see where it's flat or not, I'm going to draw some reference marks across here. It's just regular old-fashioned Sharpie. That way I'll be able to see where it is that the sandpaper is hitting the metal. Because this is sandpaper, just work all the way across it, try and keep it from curling up and whatnot on you. It's kind of the only downside with it is it likes to curl up, but work all the way across it. It's metal, there's no such thing as working with the grain. The one thing you do want to be careful of is because it's paper, it's not hard for it to actually tear. Great thing is this stuff's cheap, so you can replace it easily. But even with just that small amount, we can see where we've got, where we're actually hitting. Now, unfortunately, this is actually hitting the exact opposite of where I want it to. My non-critical areas here and in here, it's hitting perfect. My critical areas, I'm actually missing in several spots. So in that case, you know, I'm actually going to need to continue working this down some. We're actually doing really well right in here. You can see it's actually polishing that out really nicely. Unfortunately, other than the fact that it is polishing the mouth out really well, this isn't one of my most critical sections. It's doing well back in here. We're getting it nice and clean, but again, this isn't really a critical section. So this one is going to require a fair amount more work. I'd go ahead and switch back to some 220 grit paper for this and continue working it. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm not going to be able to go through the whole process and actually get this purely cleaned out. You can see where it is that I would be really wanting to focus on in here. Once you do have that section flattened out, take that, set it off to the side. Actually, no, that's pretty bad.
What are you doing there?
I am currently removing the screws in the frog. The frog is one piece that I want to make sure is also nice and flat. If the frog has a significant warp to it, it can transfer that warp into the blade, and that I don't want. I want to make sure that my frog is flat so that my blade will stay nice and flat. So we're going to pull these screws up out of here, like so. Come on. There we go. That one came loose. There's that one. Alright. So that gets that all the way out of there. And we're going to go ahead and pull this one out as well. Because the surface that I'm worried about with this is actually this surface through here. I want to make sure that this one is nice and flat through here. You can take one of your brushes and make sure that you get all the gunk out of there. It'd be nice to do the same thing down here where it's resting. Just take a brush, nylon or brass. I would not use a steel brush for this. Just clean anything out that might have gotten built up underneath there over time. Now, the only area that this restoration type work doesn't really work well in are if your frog is one made out of stamped steel. If the frog is stamped steel, then you don't really have a whole lot of options. I'm going to work this right along the edge because I want to make sure that the adjustment knob here and the lever piece there don't get damaged. Work this back here, back and forth a little bit. So this one has some natural high spots ground into it. This is a fairly heavy paint on here. I really need to go to a different grit of sandpaper to try and work this down. But what I am seeing is that it's hitting fairly evenly on this thing. So this frog is probably fairly flat to begin with, so we're in good shape there. So we're going to put this thing back together. I kind of set it up so that the frog is already sitting close to the front of the mouth. These things have a fair amount of adjustment, but if I start it back here, where it's obviously got a lot of the mouth sticking in front of it, I'm just going to have to readjust it later. So just push it forward right up where the mouth sits. We come up forward, grab our screws here, see if I can find a longer screwdriver real fast. No screwdrivers there. Where are the screwdrivers? Oh well, we'll just have to go with what we've got. We have a screwdriver. Thank you. That was Joel for all of you. He works so tirelessly behind the camera and gets everything set up and whatnot. He does a great job keeping all these demos videoed and recorded and put out on Facebook and YouTube. And we really couldn't do this without him. Those locked back in there. here for just a sec, just part of the way in. We'll adjust that screw as we need to once we get everything put back together. So we flatten off this, make sure this is nice and smooth. I would continue to work this until it's all cleaned up. Same with the frog, make sure that your surface all across here is fairly flat, and then we're done with the hand plane part of it. Now, the blade is a two-step restoration. And those two steps are the chip breaker itself and the blade itself. Now, with the chip breaker, it's important that the edge right here where it contacts the blade, we want to make sure that's nice and flat. If it's got a lot of pits or whatnot in it, it's a great place for chips and shavings to kind of drive up underneath that, and it impedes how well the blade works, and it impedes how well it cleans out. So it just gets in the way. So we're going to take this guy, lay him down here, and just work right across that edge for just a moment. Most of the time you'll be able to see if there's any large divots or anything in it, so you'll know whether you need a lot of work. Otherwise, just kind of make sure that you clean it up, get it nice and smooth. Yeah, that's all it took right there to get that a nice clean edge from one side to the other. I've got about a 32nd to a 16th of an inch wide line running from edge to edge where I can see that it's all cleaned up. I'm going to set him to the side. Now, this time we're actually going to move my block out of the way, slide that all over. And what I've got back here waiting on me is just a little catch tray. And one of my water stones. Now, for those of you who are curious, I set this water stone into its bath just before we started this. It really only takes a matter of a few minutes for most water stones to get fully saturated. I get asked that every so often. I'm going to use Veritas Honing Guide to do this part. And what I want to do here is go ahead and make sure that my primary bevel on here is where I would like it to be. Obviously, you know, having bought this at a junk store, at a thrift store, I don't know who's been doing what with this blade. I can actually see some milling marks in here that make me think it was being sharpened on a grinder at one point. So I'm going to end up cleaning up both the back and the front of this blade. Now, typically I would work through a wide range of grits for this very first dressing because of the time constraint of the demo. I'm going to use a 4000 grit just to give you an idea of where this blade is, and we can talk a little bit about what might need to be done. Have we had any questions or anything so far? No? Okay, no questions so far. All right, so my stone's already wet. Bring the water. Oops. I'm going to try not to spill the water tray all over there everywhere. Bring that over here. Just kind of make sure that's a little damp there. First thing I'm going to do is work on the back of the blade. I do want to make sure that the back is cleaned up and flat. If the bevel of the blade and the back of the blade are not both flat, then it will not perform the way you want it to. So I would work back and forth on this for a bit. I can tell I'm removing material because of how gunky the stone is looking real quick. So This blade has a fair amount of corrosion built into it, and this is a very high grit stone. So I'm not getting a lot of material moved very rapidly. But you can see on the edges here, right up to the corner, on the edges here, right up to the corner, I'm getting some shine on it. Now, the fact that I'm only catching shine out here on the edge means this whole blade is actually kind of caved in. Probably not more than a couple of thousandths or so, but it is actually caved in the center. So let's see if we can't find a little center point in there maybe. Turn that off again. Yeah, I'm actually starting to catch just a little bit in there. Looks like I'm starting to catch a couple of more spots along the edge. This blade I would continue working this blade. Given that I don't see any major dings or anything in this blade, I'd probably step back to about a 1000 grit stone and continue on up until I have a nice polished edge running from one side to the other and probably about a 1/4 of an inch or so back. That's really the critical area. If I never got this section flat, it wouldn't hurt me, but I really want to make sure that I have a nice flat edge running all the way across there. Take and knock some of the gunk off of here. So once I actually have that established all the way across there, the next thing I would want to do is double check that bevel. This is a 2-inch wide blade. At the moment I'm using a Veritas Mark II honing guide. This is one of my personal favorites. I love this jig. And I'm going to set this one for, well, actually let's see where it's set right now. I have a handy little guide here. I'm going to take, measure out. Looks like I'm right about a 25-degree bevel right now, which is a decent bevel for a general purpose hand plane. Looks like we have a question.
What angle works best for a blade?
The question is what angle works best. The answer is it actually depends on what you want to use the hand plane for. Block planes often get ground between a 20 and 30 degree bevel. The shallower the angle, essentially the sharper the edge becomes, but the less the edge won't last as long. It becomes less durable. So if I'm trying to do something where I'm really focusing on peeling off fine shavings, I'm going to go 20, 25 degrees. If we're looking at a scrub plane or some of the bigger hand planes, I might go all the way up to a 45, because now I've got a lot of meat behind that edge. It's going to be a very durable edge, but it's not really going to be quite as, quote, sharp. So having checked the angle, I know it's right around 25 degree already. Set this up in here. One of the things I love about this is because of how it locks the blade in there. Every time I use it, I know what the angle is going to be. I know it's going to be centered in the jig, and I know that it's going to be square in the jig. Now, let's see where we're looking on this. Again, this is a fairly high grit stone for this stage of the process. Most of the time I'd probably do this with more like 1000 grit stone, because then I'll be able to see what's going on a little easier. So what I'm seeing on here is that the 25 degree, this is actually ground a little bit shallower because I'm catching all the way across the edge, but I'm only catching the edge. If I was trying to do like a micro bevel on here, this would be working out perfectly. But as far as establishing the primary bevel, this is going to take a little bit of work. The upside is that the line that I'm seeing on here is pretty much running edge to edge. So there's no warp or anything to the primary bevel of this blade. It's just a matter of refining it until I've got the bevel is running from the edge back up as far as I want it to. So this, I would do some more work on the back, and I would just clean up the bevel, and then I would be in pretty good shape on this blade. So take that apart, take that over there. Set the chip breaker back on here, and I want the chip breaker to sit between the 16th and maybe an 8th, right behind the front edge of the blade. The bevel is facing the opposite direction from the chip breaker itself. The little screw that locks them both together goes right in there. Get those set up, lined up. Tighten that up. Grab my hand plane. The screw sits down, it sits in this little pocket that's right here. The alignment piece actually runs in this channel, and the little knob from the adjustment lever catches that hole. So right in there. And then my cap iron, no, see, I actually managed to set that screw in just a little too far. So we'll open that back up there, that goes on. Tighten down. Now, once I actually got the blade to the protrusion that I wanted, this would be all set, and we'd be pretty much ready to rock and roll. Do we have any other questions in through this? No? No other questions? Okay. Well, then I thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope this helps. I hope it gives you some ideas. And if you do have any questions, feel free to come on by the store. We'd love to talk to you about it. Have a great afternoon, guys.